excellent and pragmatic submission. You did not dwell on the issues, but you've gone ahead to give us practical steps on what should be done. I think one of the things that I find quite interesting about your presentation is the joint commitment and joint reforms that must happen. I think that the way that sometimes we have gone about it is that each institution thinks inwards and thinks of itself and how to reform itself, but you cannot reform one without reforming the other. We all go together. It's a whole of society, whole of government, and a citizen-centric approach as well. I've seen and I've heard legitimacy, credibility of government coming up again and again in this conversation. We had patriotism coming up as well earlier, discipline coming up. And I think these are all key terms and important words, for us to really take into consideration. I'd like to quickly call up the next speaker for today, Dr. Temitope Oriola, who is going to take us on the next presentation. Dr. Oriola is the Joint Editor-in-Chief of African Security and an Associate Professor of Criminology and Sociology at the University of Alberta. He has published so many leading and scholarly in scholarly platforms, such as Studies in Conflict and Terrorism, Third World Quarterly, the British Journal of Criminology, Canadian Journal of Criminology and Criminal Justice, amongst many others. Dr. Oriola, you have the next few minutes to share your presentation and thoughts with us, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'd like to begin by thanking the organizers, particularly General Saleh Bala, for inviting me. It is a great pleasure to be amongst such outstanding and highly distinguished panelists. And I'll begin with perhaps one or two caveats. From the presentations prior to mine, I've actually learned quite a lot. I've spent a larger chunk of my adult life outside Nigeria, and as I listened to all the presentations, I was able to see some of the missing elements. There's a real difference between engaging with some of these issues at an academic, a theoretical level, and individuals such as my co-panelists who have been on the front lines of many of these issues. So thank you for all of your presentations. Now, the co-location of a confluence of actors in developing countries, particularly in Africa, has been encapsulated and theorized with terminologies such as the network state, hybridity or hybrid security governance, and hence today we have the civilian JTF, Amoteku in the Southwest, and so on and so forth, and security assemblage, among others. The shift in emphasis from the state to a multi-nuclear governance structure vis-a-vis the security sector recognizes the absence of a legal, rational, Weberian ideal type state with untrammeled monopoly on the use of force in developing countries such as Nigeria. The security sector today is generally recognized as constituted mainly by 5 sets of actors. These include organizations mandated to use force, such as the military. We've heard quite a lot about the military today. Law enforcement organizations, such as criminal investigation services and the judiciary. Civil management and oversight bodies from the presidency to the legislature. And we have the senator who spoke from the perspective of a legislator earlier. And select ministries such as finance, budget, and defense. Again, many of these ministries have already come up in our conversations today. Others are non-statutory security organizations such as militias, liberation armies, and self-defense organizations. And finally, non-statutory civil society bodies such as the media, religious organizations, trade unions, NGOs, and engaged members of the public. The civil management and oversight bodies constitute the epicenter of the theme of this panel's concern. The role of components of this aspect of the security architecture, such as the president, the NSA, and other public servants concerned with security, arguably has an over-determining effect on the security sector. The role of civil servants has tended to be de-emphasized. Public and civil servants are mutually reinforcing, synergistic, and referential in a co-productive, co-constitutive processual relationship with the state and society. One quintessential Nigerian example may suffice. In December 2015, the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari announced the findings of a committee set up to audit arms procurement in Nigeria's defense sector from 2007 to 2015. The committee found that $2.1 billion had been illicitly disbursed by a former NSA, Colonel Sambo Dasuki. Colonel Sambo Dasuki appeared to have had unbridled authority to use huge parts of the defense funds to support the re-election of President Goodluck Jonathan. Categories of persons charged with receiving the arms funds included 17 serving and retired senior military officers. At least 241 companies were allegedly involved, including those set up by high-ranking officers to bid for contracts. The helicopters that were purchased were, and I'm quoting now, excessively priced and not operationally airworthy at the time of delivery, unquote. The helicopters were found to be unsuitable for use in the Northeast, and the ammunition that were purchased were about 40 years old. The arms scandal uncovered by the Buhari administration has implications for engaging with the theme of today's discussions on the bureaucracy in security sector governance, vis-a-vis evaluation of the role of the Nigerian civil and public services and political institutions. While attention has understandably been focused on senior military officers, the role of high-ranking civil servants has not received the same level of attention, at least in much of public conversations. 12 civil servants were indicted in that scandal. 10 of the indicted civil servants were from the Ministry of Defense. 3 of the officials from the Ministry of Defense had served as permanent secretaries, while 5 had served as directors of finance and accounts at the MOD. In particular, the turnover in the permanent secretary and director of finance and accounts suggests that the 2 positions were considered lucrative. My focus is not on the individuals involved in the scandal. That is a matter for the courts. My focus is much more modest and sociological rather than legalistic. My concern is bifocal. First, the implications of the scandal for the bureaucracy in security sector governance, and second, the salience or importance of context, socio-political, cultural, and economic, in understanding the roles of the civil and public services. The scandal began from the former president, who appeared to have approved the funds without oversight. Now, the widespread nature and involvement of an assortment of institutional and non-institutional actors and organizations with political relevance in the scandal is central to my concern. Those who allegedly shared the arms funds cut across politics, the media, the military, civil service, public service, traditional institutions, and the clergy. What this speaks to is what Rita Abrahamson calls the statelessness of the state. The Nigerian state, in a theoretical sense, stood no chance. To be clear, as a mechanism of political patronage, although illegal, the use of the arms fund was not necessarily illogical in the context of Nigeria's political process. Therefore, there would have been no arms scandal at President Jonathan won the 2015 presidential elections. It would have been part of routine exchange relations. The arms scandal became a justiciable matter because President Jonathan lost his bid for re-election. I argue that what I theorize as political toxicity is the main impediment at the epicenter of the performance of Nigeria's public and civil services in security governance. The term toxic has garnered significant global attention in the last 6 years. It means, as we all might imagine, poisonous, and emerged in the English language in the 17th century from medieval Latin toxicus. The term toxic was adjudged Oxford Word of the Year in 2018. Now, the growing co-locating of toxic with words such as culture, masculinity, environment, relationship, and so forth in scholarly and popular discourses is indicative of public awareness of and fascination with the underlying poisonous characteristics of certain actors, actions, social contexts, and social structures. The idea is that certain norms of behavior at the individual and/or institutional level, embedded structures and courses of action are deleterious to the well-being of some actors in particular and all actors in general. Now, while life itself is inherently political, political toxicity refers to the involvement of unalloyed political underpinnings and motives in every action or inaction. Political toxicity is present when whatever is done by an actor within a social context is for the furtherance of the individual's personal, party, ethnic, or religious group's interest. At other times, perception of political underpinnings is a critical variable. People's perceptions, as we all know, often tend to be their reality. This generates social discontent and societal disequilibria over the minutest details of governance and daily life. There are 6 variables in this idea of political toxicity. These are over-politicization of social life, corruption, which we've heard a lot about. My co-panelists have spoken quite articulately about that. Discriminatory use of state apparatus of coercion in favor of the governing elite, and impunity. Other variables are interpellation of the masses in bureaucratic malfeasance and governmental ineptitude. This approach, which is captured in my forthcoming book publication, which should be out in the next few months, this approach recognizes the agency of the African state in and of itself. It privileges endogenous over exogenous factors in understanding the African state. Although the contours of the African state are shaped by the constellation of historical moments and flows, as Jean-Francois Bayet argues, and I'm quoting now, it rests upon autochthonous foundations and a process of reappropriation of institutions of colonial origin, which gives it its own historicity. It can no longer be taken as a purely exogenous structure, unquote. In other words, despite the credulity of claims relating to colonial legacy, the African state, alongside its signature elements, such as its bureaucracy, is in many ways its own entity. Its genius lies in its synthetic and innate capacity. Its manifestations are irreducible to its constitutive elements or historical encumbrance. The formation of the Nigerian bureaucracy was influenced by a modernizationist paradigm that required abandonment of virtually all aspects of the indigenous culture and its distilled wisdom. Critics of security sector reforms have cautioned against the reification of the state, delineation of the state and non-state, the superficial distinction between the public and private domains, and the immanent ahistoricism of much analysis grappling with the facticity of the post-colonial state. There is no understanding the role of the public and civil services in security sector governance without contending with their embeddedness in the body politic of the state, the society, and interactions between the two. The public and civil services encompass both the state and society. They shape the texture of the state while possessing an arguably teleological influence on society. Now consider the role of the public and civil services in Nazi Germany, to use an extreme example. In evaluating the role of the public and civil services in Nigeria, we must grapple with the contours of the society in which they operate and vice versa. Western societies have been construed as difference consuming in recognition of the tendency to abhor the unfamiliar, or literally and metaphorically consume the foreign. Societies such as ours are what I call difference-conscious societies, where no pretensions are made about ethno-religious, cultural, and linguistic origins. I have had great trouble telling colleagues in Nigeria and prospective graduate applicants that that there is no need to include their sex, religion, state of origin, local government, marital status, and the number and ages of their children on their CVs. These markers of intersectional identities are part of the bureaucratic portmanteau that a job or admission seeker has to include on their CVs in Nigeria. They will be considered strange in different consuming societies. Whether or not it is overtly recognized, Nigerians are conscious of their difference and are not politically correct about it. This has spread to bureaucracies. We cannot have people include all these pieces of identitarian information on their CVs and application documents, and then complain about officials who are hiring people from their hometown. It is time to make a decision about how to proceed. Make bureaucratic decisions with full awareness of people's identities, or adopt an identity-neutral system wherein names are suppressed and other identifying pieces of information are replaced with numerical codes. My point is that matters of autochthony...
Sorry, Dr. Oriola, sorry, your time is up.
I'll just wrap up very quickly. Now, there's the whole issue regarding intelligence leaks and sabotage by security agents or public servants, particularly in the defense sector. And the point I like to make about that is that these are not always necessarily motivated by pecuniary motive, and I hope that we'll be able to elaborate more on that during the Q&A. There's sometimes a consequence of loss of confidence in leadership, institutional breakdown in their ranks, and or disagreement about the direction of the political process. And there was an example of this in apartheid South Africa, when under President Frederick de Klerk, certain sections of the security establishment withheld vital information about clandestine operations from their commander-in-chief at the twilight of apartheid. There were elements loyal to Botha, de Klerk's predecessor, who were intent on maintaining apartheid. De Klerk could not reform their security architecture until intelligence leaks began to appear in the press. And the Madiba Nelson Mandela coined the term third force to refer to the pseudo-state entity responsible for the seemingly random attacks against Black people during negotiations for the end of apartheid. Some serving and retired agents in the South African security establishment were opposed to political reforms that would lead to the end of apartheid. Leaking intelligence to a terrorist organization therefore goes deeper than has been previously contemplated in the case of Nigeria. And finally, in evaluating the performance of the civil service in Nigeria's security sector, we must recognize that Nigeria is what Clifford Gates calls old societies and new state. Allegiances and loyalties precede the state. The basic rudiments of an effective civil or public service remain relevant. Defined tenure of office, training, salaries, merit, among others. Overall, how well the civil and public services perform their role is contingent on socioeconomic conditions in Nigeria and the degree of political toxicity in the system. The Nigerian civil and public services are not mere relics of a colonial era. They are no longer alien to us or our culture. They are an autochthonous and fundamentally made in Nigeria products. They are a reflection of the state and society we have built. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Oriola, for that very comprehensive deep dive within the little time that you had. A comprehensive deep dive into issues of, I think we would call this the political economy of security sector governance or national security management. And you have highlighted the dynamics within the political economy, within the political environment that frustrates the functioning of the national security apparatus. As I listened to you speak, I was reminded of two issues by two famous Nigerian academics. One is the concept of the two publics by Peter Eke, where he talks about the dissonance between the formal public space and the informal / traditional / primordial space of pre-colonial Nigerian societies, and how those competing allegiances play out in the way that the national security bureaucracy, or even just the public bureaucracy generally, works. I was also reminded of Richard Joseph's thesis of prebendalism, which he makes his, it is his comprehensive theory about the logic of Nigerian government, or the logic of Nigerian public life. And what you've done is to cite how these two dynamics come together to, as it were, frustrate the workings of the national security bureaucracy. In particular, you've talked about how the weaponization of identity and the use of state capture in particular, but both factors, basically subverts the workings of national security management. It was a most embracing presentation from you. And I think that you've provided a lot of meat for us to get into subsequently. Thank you very much. Our next panelist is Lieutenant General Chikadibia Obiako, retired. Lieutenant General Obiako was the UN Advisor Peacekeeping Operations at the Department of Peacekeeping, and earlier the Force Commander of the United Nations mission in Liberia. He is a Grand Fellow of the Institute of Strategic Management and a Grand Patron of the Nigerian Psychological Association. He holds a Master of Science degree in Strategic Studies from the University of Ibadan, and he was the chairman of the White Paper Writing Committee for the Nigerian Defense Strategy, reviewed in 2018-19. General Obiako, you're most welcome. Please proceed with your presentation. You have 10 minutes. We're happy to hear your thoughts. Thank you. You still have to unmute, sir.
Can you hear me now?
Absolutely, absolutely. Please proceed, sir.
Thank you very much. May I seize this opportunity to thank the organizers of this webinar. The issue in discussion is a very laudable one, and I think it's time we start thinking and doing things about where we are. Well, I've been asked to address a portion of all that we're talking, which is I'll be speaking on my professional interaction with the Ministry of Defense compared to my experiences at the civilian-led United Nations mission in Liberia and at the UN Department of Peacekeeping Operations in New York headquarters. I've heard what my superior ones had said. I've listened attentively to what Dr. Hakim Babangida said. And of course, AVM Umaru and the wonderful drive by Temitope Ajola. And all they said are, as a matter of fact, reality. But I want to start by saying that the aims and objectives of the Ministry of Defense, which is where I'm supposed to be talking about, is derived from national defense policy as follows. I just picked some few points because it tells tales. It says maintaining men of the Nigerian Armed Forces in the state of combat readiness on land, sea, and air. Maintaining a proper balance in arms and men to meet the needs of internal and external security. Enhancing the capability and sophistication of the country's defense industries in order to reduce the country's dependence on foreign sources of supply. And lastly, ensuring security in the African continent by the promotion of a collective defense system through bilateral, sub-regional, and continental cooperation to ward off external aggressions and to attain the African objective of the national foreign policy. Wonderful assignment given to them. But with what the little I'm going to talk about, we'll see whether they are doing that job. And then, of course, we shall proceed. Now, fundamentally, I want to state that the Ministry of Defense we're talking about is inherited, the structure is inherited from the colonial masters. For all intents and purposes, it was designed to serve the purposes of the British administration. And so the interest of the colonized was not important. At independence, we adopted the structure without recourse to fundamentally execute what should serve Nigeria and its people. We could not copy the British currently, because if you go and look into what the Ministry of Defense does in the United Kingdom, then you will now know that we don't know how to copy. And indeed, we copied wrongly. And there was no effort whatsoever to articulate a Nigerian national policy that will define our identity, aspirations, interests. Indeed, the ground norm was anything we could just copy, and that's all. Now, regarding my interaction with the Ministry of Defense, to highlight what I discovered, the Ministry of Defense, as it is today, lacked the capacity to manage and direct services. It cannot articulate and drive policies in tandem with the NDP, which itself normally asks bodies to revise or review. And of course, it indulges in incoherent channels of communication and implementation, lack the professionals for the specialist functions of the ministry. A very good example is in procurement, where we could, from the Ministry of Defense, after getting into an agreement with the United Nations, procure things that we did not sign on to. And of course, the United Nations will do what? Reject them. Lack of the political will to implement even the national defense policy, which it had asked people or organizations to look at, they wouldn't have the political will to implement. And FVM Umaru is there. He did the last review, and I did the white paper on it, and up to today, nothing has happened about it. These are just some few examples. What is my experience interacting with the United Nations? At the level of the UN headquarters, if there should be a mission whatsoever, the Security Council will normally create a mandate, and the mandate with itself will now drive to have the configuration of the mission, the task groups, and specializations. Then at the level of missions, you have the mission leadership, and the mission leadership under the special representative or Secretary General will articulate the mission plan and with the leadership. And then, of course, the specialist elements will now form